The strongholds at Agersborg, Fürket, Nonnebagen, Trelleborg and Borgring were built between roughly 970 and 980. They were placed strategically close to major land and sea routes and each used the geography of their immediate surroundings to their advantage. They bear witness to the socio-political changes that the Danish realm experienced in the latter part of the 10th century and served as a symbol of the centralized power of the Jelling dynasty. They were even included in the UNESCO list of Global Heritage in 2023. So what makes them so special? Stick around to find out more. King Harald Bluetooth, who ruled from approximately 958 to 987, is most remembered in Denmark for having erected the Jelling stone, a sizable rock that has the earliest recorded mention of the term Denmark and is frequently referred to as Denmark's birth certificate, or at least part of it. When archaeologists eventually uncovered Borgring in 2014, it had been 60 years since they had found a ringed castle like that in Denmark. While some said that the fortress had been known for about some time, many others questioned whether it was really a Viking fortress. The Viking Age's ring fortresses were only in place for a brief period of time. Fürket and Trelleborg, two of the best dated fortifications, appear to have been founded between 974 and 981, while discoveries from the other fortresses point to a similar date. No other large fortifications existed in Denmark in the rest of the Viking Age, from the end of the 700s up to 1000, except for the city walls of Hedeby, now in modern-day Germany, Ribe and Aarhus. Chieftains and kings usually built large halls and farms, but not fortresses. Several theories have been put forth as to why these were constructed, such as camps of training for the Viking army who invaded England during Svein Forkbeard's reign. When tree dating demonstrated that Trelleborg and Fürket strongholds were constructed and occupied decades prior to the major onslaught in England, this theory was abandoned in the 80s. For many years, Harald Bluetooth constructed fortified centers of royal control to manage the populace of the newly united Denmark. However, the dates did not match up with this theory. Why did Bluetooth construct the fortifications towards the end of his reign, more than 10 years after he ascended to the throne in 958 and after he proclaimed Denmark to be a Christian nation in 963? Perhaps as military installations where Bluetooth and his son Svein Forkbeard fought. The son of Bluetooth rebelled against his father, but this rebellion must have lasted for over 10 years nationwide if the fortifications were constructed around 975. It did not fit, once more. Maybe as a consequence of a unique foreign policy circumstance. Early in Bluetooth's reign, King Otto I of Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, elected emperor in 962, was leading a developing new authority. Harald Bluetooth's decision to become a Christian in order to escape becoming Otto's next target was undoubtedly influenced by Otto's increasing authority. It was concluded that Harald Bluetooth built fortifications because of this particular set of difficulties of the circumstance. Let me explain why. Following Otto I's death in 973, his son Otto II increased the threat to Harald Bluetooth's Denmark by attacking the Dannevirke in what is now Germany. Denmark remained a target of warfare until Otto II's death in 983. Why were they constructed on the islands of Fyn and Sjælland, nevertheless, as well as Skåne in southern Sweden, so far away from the Danish-German border, if Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, was the threat? The distribution of fortresses across the territory can also be explained by the following factor. Harald Bluetooth was vulnerable to additional attacks from the outside, particularly from Norway and Sweden, who tried to take advantage of the king's precarious position as a result of the threat from the south. Thus, strongholds were built all around the realm. It was a defense along the coast. Instead of being Viking fortresses, they were actually used to fend off other Vikings, so raiders in the narrow meaning of the word. This theory is what brought archaeologists to the discovery of Borgring. It implied that Harald Bluetooth needed a stronghold to guard the nation's east coast, and it's proved to be the case. Harald had to mobilize warriors along the southern border by requesting reinforcements from all chieftains who were in support of him due to the conflict with the south. The skaldic poem Velekla, composed as a laudatory poem to the Norwegian Earl Håkon, a contemporary of Harald Bluetooth, recounted such an operation. The poem claims that Håkon was called to help Harald fight at the Dannevirke. This left some areas completely undefended and without the warriors who would typically guard them. The strongholds were necessary because Bluetooth needed to provide these regions with some kind of defense in order to prevail in the conflict with the south. By building ring fortifications, Harald was able to achieve something no other Danish monarch had: a consolidation of power across the entire territory. The size of Trelleborg's buildings indicates that some of the fortifications were built at the appropriate time to serve as communities or possibly as warriors' winter quarters. Above all, though, this network of fortifications made it possible for the king to make better use of his main military resource, the warriors. Rather than being manned by these soldiers, the fortresses served as a safeguard for the non-warrior component of the populace. This was a decisive countermeasure that allowed Harald to defend and win the war in another part of the kingdom. All in all, both the development of the Holy Roman Empire and various threats from other Nordic neighbors set the construction of the strongholds in motion. Borgring, south of Copenhagen and close to Køge, was recognized as the fifth instance of this group in Denmark in 2014. At Borgring, a significant program of surveys and research excavations was conducted between 2016 and 2018. The citadel and its environs were subjected to geophysical surveys, metal detector scans, and soil geochemical research as part of the project. In addition to survey excavations covering over 40 hectares of the surrounding area, excavations were carried out within the ring fortress itself in an effort to find evidence of modern activity. The Borgring is situated near a natural crossing point where the valley is about 200 meters wide, and it is situated in a ridge gap that is nearly 1 kilometer wide. The site's characteristics are comparable to those of other Trelleborg type sites. It is dry but well defended, close to important roads and crossings, close to a place where the shoreline enters, and still some distance from the open sea. Compared to the other strongholds, Borgring has a far stronger relief, and it is unlikely that it could have supported a complete set of huge buildings without the need of extensive leveling work. Before the excavation began, the Borgring was almost completely lost to view in the terrain, much like the original circumstances at Aggersborg and Virket. Photography taken after 1970 clearly revealed the presence of earthwork. The excavations showed that the preserved height of the rampart varied from less than 25 centimeters at the eastern gateway, where the structures were most heavily eroded, to 1 meter in the low-lying southern and western sections. The 2014 research paper by Christensen and his team is dense with technical details, as one might anticipate from a paper on archaeology. One finding was that the pre-construction leveling was required because the building site could not match the demands of the intended ring fortress right away. The building site had to be expanded into the river valley covering the gully slope in order to accommodate the ring fortress' intended diameter. In order to make room for the rampart and gateways, more than 1900 cubic meters of clay-rich material, including the remnants of ancient ceramics and flint-knapping debris, were moved to the gully, the site of the river valley, and the other depressions in the landscape. Before building the rampart, a depression to the northeast was also filled in. The rampart was constructed in 4 separate but identical sections. Evidence from the southwestern rampart suggests that an initial 10 to 30 centimeter thick layer of dark and reddish turfs marked out the ground plan. The original height of the rampart is unknown, but may have reached about 3 meters at the front, which inclined about 70 degrees towards the inside. The substantial amounts of soil found accumulated along the rampart were presumably part of the collapsed or leveled fill. There was probably a wooden palisade on the top of the ramparts. The 4 gateways were built with 2 parallel rows of posts along each side and 4 huge corner posts. They measured around 4.6–4.8 meters wide and 10.6–10.7 meters long. The rampart's height appears to have been matched by the entrances, which had wooden plank roofs. Finding out how closely the stronghold resembled the previously identified Trelleborg-type ruins was a major goal of the study. Most people agree that the strongholds of the Trelleborg type were constructed with a measure called the Trelleborg foot of about 29.5 centimeters. In what way does Borgring compare? The width of the gateways is 16 such feet, and its rampart is exactly 36 feet, so that means 10.6 meters wide, the same as Fyrkets. The diameter of the courtyard would have been 400 Trelleborg feet if a ring street of 9 Trelleborg feet was projected, as was the case at Trelleborg with a rampart and street of 36 to 9 meters on either side. These measurements strongly imply that Borgring was designed and projected in accordance to comparable specifications and probably by the same builder as the previously known Trelleborg type fortifications, along with the precise geometry shown in the circular arrangement and the position of the entrances. The excavations yielded a modest range of artifacts, of which many relate to the early Iron Age settlement. The secure Viking Age artifacts include a cache of tools, a small axe, 3 whetstones, a fragment of silver brooch, 7 glass beads, and several sherds of early glazed ceramics. Let's briefly exemplify. Beneath the burnt layer of the collapsed northern gateway, at the level of the original gateway floor, a small sliver of ornate silver was discovered. It is composed of a small bit of bronze fastener, a tiny piece of gold foil, and a fragment of silver ornamented with yellow inlay. The piece is a portion of a brooch in the form of a box that originated on the Swedish island of Gotland. It is the upper portion of a heavily carved side piece, the brooch having been adorned by 4 of them. As opposed to the knot design that is more prevalent on these brooches, it features an ornamentation of 2 spirals meeting. There are less than 50 known finds of type 7 box brooches as they were classified. Most of them had been located on Gotland. In the eastern doorway, a pit dug under the layer that sealed the fire revealed the stockpile of tools and iron pieces. The last incident in the gateway that can be linked to before the building finally collapses is the burial of the cache. There are 20 artifacts in all within the cache. Iron ingots, used clinker nails, scrap pieces, and various items that have been recognized as tools include a nail header, portions of a draw knife, a clamp, an awl, a fire steel, an enormous lacer prong, and a belt hook and a ring. The assemblage's metallurgical studies indicates that the bog iron most likely originates in southern Sweden. An exception is the draw knife, made of iron from Central Europe. All of the tools were made of high-quality steel by a skilled craftsman. The objects discovered at Borgring point to activity in the 10th century. Early 11th century glazed pottery was discovered in layers after the site was destroyed. In the stronghold, no wood appropriate for dendrochronology was discovered. The 2014 excavation yielded 2 radiocarbon dates that ranged in age from the late 9th to the early 11th century. Samples for carbon-14 wiggle matching were collected in an effort to reduce the amount of time that the castle was constructed. The findings show that the 2 trees at the northern entrance were taken down following 930, most likely in the second half of the 10th century. Again, for very technical details, just check the paper, it is linked in the description. No signs of Viking Age activity were found at all in the region that was examined. The remnants of many buildings to the east of the stronghold were dated to the late Roman Iron Age and the migration period by grain samples, while the post holes of a single house's walls from the 14th or 15th century AD were discovered on the hill to the north of Borgring. A 3-aisled home in the present-day settlement of Lellinge was discovered on the river valley's southern flank. Using samples of charred grain and charcoal taken from the holes in 2 roof-supporting pillars, the home was dated by carbon-14 to the middle of the 3rd and early 6th centuries AD. Moreover, activity here dates to the 11th or 12th century AD according to a pit containing Baltic ware shards. Nearby, a submerged path that led to a stream ford was discovered, suggesting that the location of the Borgring was probably chosen because it provided a means of crossing the river valley. The design of Borgring is similar to other Trelleborg-style sites in terms of location selection, pre-construction landscape change, layout, and proportion. These findings imply that Borgring was in fact designed to be a component of the network of strongholds built throughout Harald Bluetooth's domain. However, some differences were found during excavation, suggesting that Borgring was either abandoned or constructed to a point where it was no longer used, from whence the other fortifications developed. Borgring lacks roadways, residential buildings, and ditches where they would have been appropriate in comparison to Fjerkert, which has a rampart that has nearly the same breadth and circumference. Within the rampart there was no wooden structure, and the front of the rampart's cladding was only recorded in the northeast and southeast, not in the west or southwest. This could mean that the rampart was not finished. Neither the widespread presence of people nor other gatherings of warriors could be identified. However, there are various locations around the stronghold where there are signs of destructive fire, and there are deep wheel tracks that indicate frequent use by passing traffic. Since it was the final ring fortress to be built, it might have been abandoned during construction because it was deemed unnecessary. This could have happened around the middle of the 980s when Svein Forkbeard, King Harald Bluetooth's son, was leading a rebellion. Chronicles from the late 11th century state that the king's exceptional burdens on the populace, as well as their conversion to Christianity, were the main causes of this agitation. The construction of Borgring may have been the tipping point if the exceptional burdens were providing labor and resources for the king's trademark monuments to be built throughout the realm. According to this theory, the king's opponents may have declared their opposition by setting fire to 3 of the 4 doorways, which would have caused the place to be abandoned. An additional rationale for the lack of several constituent elements typical of a geometric ring fortress is that Borgring was completed to an initial provisional stage of use. Among the early medieval European fortifications, these are unique because of their deliberate attempt to create an identifiable visual standard throughout the whole kingdom. The findings from Borgring, as well as the angle they permit at other occasions, point to the importance of building a stronghold above establishing garrisons or permanent quarters for soldiers. Not all ring fortresses were situated in the most advantageous position in the area where they were constructed, neither military nor defensively. Furthermore, a stronghold's defensive worth is diminished when it has 4 gateways rather than just 1. While some of the portals at Borgring, Firket and Trelleborg were inoperative during their opening into man-made or natural barriers, they would still be the weak spots searched for by an attacking party. Rather, the work that went into building them might have been both functional and symbolic. Big timber fortifications provided shelter for common people throughout the Saxon and Slavic conflicts, which took place in a region that was both culturally and geographically similar to Viking Age Denmark. This was especially true when the trained warriors embarked on expedition. But erecting fortresses was more than just a means of defense. It was also a demonstration of power and strength. As a commanding symbol of the king's authority and presence, these monuments were almost impossible to miss out at the intersection of major roads. So yes, we do have quite unique fortresses in this time and space, even if not as mighty or impressive as others. They still give us insight into the challenges of political and social life of the early Middle Ages. If you enjoyed this presentation, hit the subscribe button for much more content on the Viking Age. This was Irina. Thanks for listening, and till next time.